So in the previous lecture, we exported a native library right from Xcode, which is in Objective-C that I have right here to the right, over to a Visual Studio project that I have here on the left. Now I mentioned that contrary to Android, we do need a bit more configuration for us to be able to export this as a DLL file that we will of course be able to use directly from the Contacts app Xamarin Forms project that we already have. And so what we have to do is tell C# exactly how is it that it is going to export this Objective-C code. And so we will have to add a bit more information right here inside of the Contacts library iOS file. So the reason why I have these two projects side by side, Xcode, Visual Studio open right here, is that we're going to be following how our Xcode project is structured, or this class, how this interface, the definition in the .h file is defined, so we can define it over here on C#. And this is what I mean. For us to be able to bind this, we will need the same interface. So just like on Xcode, on Objective-C, we have the Contacts app interface, we will also need the Contacts app interface over here on C#. So I will define the interface as Contacts app. And I'm sure that you know that normally interfaces on C# are defined with an I at the beginning. This is not going to be the case. I will just define this as Contacts app. Now I also have to establish the base type for Contacts app, because the base type is going to be NSObject. So I will have to go ahead and establish base type as the type of NSObject, which is precisely the base type for Contacts app over here on Objective-C. Then, if I want to export these three properties that I have, I will have to define the same properties, and these are all NS strings over on Objective-C, so it means that these are going to be strings over on C#. I'm going to be calling these the same, except on Objective-C we use a capital letter to define these elements. I will also define the last name then. And of course the prop templates are using public. I won't be able to use public in here, but let me just define email and get rid of the access modifiers in here, which I cannot set inside of the interface. So of course this is one property in C# for each property in Objective-C, but I need to define how is it that I'm going to be exporting this from Objective-C over to these C# properties. And for that, again, it's going to be very similar to what we just did for the base type. I just need to set that I want to export, and in parentheses I have to set the selector. The selector is simply going to be the name of the property. So for the name property, I use the name selector, which is the name of the property itself over on Objective-C. And so the same thing is going to be required for last name and for email. Next, let's create a constructor, that init with name, last name, email method that we have over on the Contacts app on Objective-C, that is the constructor. So in Objective-C, let me define the constructor. This is going to have to return this struct that is coming from the ID thing that we have right before init with name. And this is going to be called constructor. But this is actually going to require three parameters. And the parameters that it needs are NS strings. And it's going to be the name, the last name, and the email. Now exporting this is going to be a little bit different than exporting simple properties, because this particular method, and this is going to be the same for methods, this in particular is a constructor, but this would apply to methods as well. This constructor is receiving three arguments. So the export is going to require a particular naming, and I of course still need to export this, and in parentheses set the selector. However, the selector is going to be interesting because this is going to be init with name, colon. This colon defines that we need a particular argument in here. So we need to pass something. If you're familiar with Objective-C, you know exactly what I mean in here, but you know, we have to set the colon in here. Then last name, because here is the second parameter that we need. and finally email and colon for the third parameter that we need. And so we are exporting this already. And finally, let's export the grid contact and the by contact methods. These are going to be easier because they don't receive any parameters. So let me simply define the grid contact and the by contact methods. And again, I will have to export this. And because these are not receiving any parameters, all I have to do is write like this with no colons at all. Just like this. And so I now have the export of this Objective-C library. Notice that I'm not implementing anything. This is just the interface. The implementation itself is going to be coming directly from Objective-C, from the .m file that we have over here with the actual implementation of these methods. All we have to do now then is build our project. So let me go ahead and simply, again, build this bindings library for iOS that we have created. Which means that now, similar to with what happened with Android, in the bin folder of this project that we created and in the debug folder, we're going to have this DLL file. Again, this is something very similar to what we ended up when we created a bindings library from Android. Now this DLL can be used directly in our Contacts app project. So over here in that Contacts app project precisely, I am going to be adding a brand new reference. I am going to edit the references, navigate to .NET Assembly, and I'm going to browse for that DLL file that I know is over on Contacts Library iOS, the bin folder, the debug folder, and this DLL file, and simply click on OK. This again is now going to be very similar to what we did on Android. Starting with the creation of a brand new file that is going to be our contact class. And the contact class is, again, we have this on Android already. We have to export this because this is going to be a dependency, and this has to implement the iContact interface that is coming directly from the Contacts app. If we implement the interface, we have the by contact, the hello contact, and let me export this dependency. Just like on Android then, I will go ahead and instead of these methods that we have that are coming from this interface, going to use whatever we have over on that Contacts app library. So from Contact app, to be able to use Contact app, we need the using directive to Contacts library iOS, which is what we have just imported. And so this Contacts app, which is our interface, let me go ahead and define a new contact, which notice is precisely going to have, in this case, two constructors. One constructor that is the one by default, the one that receives nothing, but the second one is the one that receives those three strings. So let me go ahead and create, just like on Android, just like on the Android example one for myself. And what this is going to return is from that contact what the grid contact method returns. Actually, in this case, is the by contact. And for the hello contact, well, I'm going to create the same contact, but this one is going to be this one returning the grid contact. So again, this is going to be almost identical to what we have over on Android. And so because this is already registering the dependency, you may remember how in the Xamarin Forms project, this .NET Standard project, we are in the main page already getting the value from the dependency service. So Android was already implemented, but we have not tested this on iOS. If we now test this on iOS, this is now going to be using the implementation that we have just created using this code that is coming directly from Objective-C. So all we have to do now is test this out on an iOS simulator. And remember, because we are testing on an iOS simulator, we have to export our library for the iOS simulator. And by the way, of course, we have to pass NS strings, not strings. So let me just cast these strings as NS strings. So once I've cast this as NS strings, just like this, a normal C# string over to an Objective-C NS string, one that is coming from Foundation. Now let me go ahead and test this out. As you can see, the result is going to be the expected one. We see this hello and my name, which is exactly the name that I'm setting to the constructor. but this code is coming directly from our Objective-C code. We have this hello and name and last name. And the same thing would have to happen if I call the by contact instead, or I call from the main page instead of the hello contact, the by contact. So you can now see how we can also bind a native Objective-C library that we have created over to a bindings library over to our contacts application, which is a normal Xamarin Forms project. And we're simply practicing the usage of dependency services by injecting this dependency in the same way that we did in Android. So finally, in the next lecture, we're going to see also how to link on iOS. We're going to take a look at linking on iOS, which is going to be, again, as important as it was on Android. For now, you already know how to take an Objective-C library over to your Xamarin Forms project and use it.